Boz has been really great helping me set up for this because my confidence in computer and tech exchanges is minimal. But I really also enjoyed very much getting to visit with her and to set this event up. It's been very exciting for me and a pleasure, absolute pleasure. So she put together an outline for us to follow, and anytime you have questions, please feel free to ask. I will try to stay on track as much as possible, but I do have a tendency to tangent and to run down those rabbit holes, which has also led me to an expansive familiarity with different aspects of ceramics and glazes. So I'm looking forward to sharing it with you this evening. What is this now? Okay. All right. So Faz, you put this up, and we hadn't talked about who made them, anything about the temperature range or the type of glaze they are. Do you have that information?
No, I don't have anything about this. This is something that is always perplexing. Is this what we want?
Yeah, this is, these cups demonstrate a really good control of the process for making something in clay and also maintaining a control over a glaze that is very expressive. And because they match so perfectly, I tend to think that they were made in a form of some sort, possibly cast, possibly thrown by a very good potter who also had very good control over the glaze. And there are two more pictures coming that will also relate to how glazes flow, whether or not they are considered a glaze flaw or something to admire, perhaps. So back to the first one. I looked at it really carefully, and it seems to me that it's very legitimate. The clay is very nicely smoothed after the pieces were made. It's a buff stoneware, high fire clay, you can tell by looking. And the glaze looks authentically flowing, which means that it stopped in a natural way depending on the flow and the heat control of the kiln. So the reason I think that they're legitimate is because of the slight coloration of the blue in the drip line. And it's a beautiful migration of a really yummy, fat, white satin glaze, satin gloss glaze. They're very inviting. You can just imagine picking one up and using it and what it might feel like. So on to the next one. Glazes, do run off the pots, and that's why we use kill wash on the shelves. At least I do. People use cookies. Some in crystalline glazes, they use the specialized fitted catch-all feet that they knock off later and clean up the edges. So this is a piece of mine that was a refire, and when it was fired the first time, the glaze did not go past the foot, but on the refire, it continued to flow, and having used enough kill wash on the shelf, came loose very nicely. And the tendency is to want to grind off the drips if they go past the foot. And I have found that grinding glaze drips leaves you with a kind of a pocked, volcanic looking rough surface, no matter how much you have to make it smooth. So I actually love the way it pooled and stopped, and on this side of the pot especially. And it also shows the characteristics of the glaze really nicely, where the way it conformed to the shape of the piece and how it expressed its color. So the next one is by Ron Nagel. And when I was a youngster, Ron Nagel was up and coming, and he was considered everybody's bad boy in the ceramic world in the Bay Area. And when he started making his pieces, we knew they were fairly well controlled. They were cast forms. They were mostly variations on the cup form. And he was able to maintain the flow of the glaze so that it looked like this. And it was very impressive because we all had pieces that flowed off the edges, got out of control, but he got saturated colors, control of the different surface types of glazes. I don't think this was slab constructed, but it could have been. He also used molds extensively, so he would have to make a mold with these shapes and then put it together. So technically speaking, this was a remarkable piece, and we were all very impressed. Now, since then, he's still creating in the Bay Area. He's an elder, as am I, and his work has changed a lot. The next one shows. Oh, we took it out. That's right. Let's go back. What I did find out about his pieces, because I was just so impressed, go back to Ron's piece. Yeah, I was so impressed because I was always fascinated by the expertise of different potters when they would focus on a certain kind of genre or style and where they would take it. I've always been fascinated with all of that. And with the variety that is unending with everybody who works in clay. Everybody does it differently. Even if you try to copy someone, it's different. And it allows for so many different ways of expressing one's energy. So when I found out that he had the control over those flow drips, it was not because the glazes were being controlled. It was because he sculpted them into his clay and then glazed them, which blew away the mystique for me, but it was still an eye-opener. It made me think twice. So compared to the pieces on the first slide, the 4 cups, this is simulated drip flow. And I really think that the cups on the first slide were really legitimate. So there was no way really to know with these types of things that he used if they were fabricated drips, because they were usually opaque and did not express the glaze in terms of its flow character, like that first one where you could see the white glaze with the blue kind of shadows in the deeper areas. So that was my take on it. Whether you like that or not, everybody, when they start ceramics, they want to make it right. They want to make it perfect. And after you start doing it for a while, I'd say a period of at least 2 years, you start finding that you can do pretty well, and that maybe you'd like to have it a little bit more expressive rather than perfect, because when you reach perfect, dead end. And I've heard, I've been influenced by a lot of different people and what they say about the work, but one person that I knew for quite a while was Beatrice Wood. And even though we didn't discuss too much about ceramics per se, certainly she never shared her recipes or even much of her techniques. Well, I knew her, and it was about 20 years. She would say, if it's perfect, it's dead. It's over. And everything she would tell me, I would think about, because I didn't understand that when I first heard it. But if you've succeeded in attaining what you wanted to make, and it came out how you expected it to, you have completed that cycle of learning. That piece can't teach you anything more. It's the other pieces that leave you wondering, how did that happen? Why did that happen? That lead you to new territory and more creativity.
Frigging.
What? All right.
Yeah, I think somebody just has they're not muted.
Oh, okay. So with that in mind, we'll go on to everybody else's work. All right. So pinholing is a problem, and it can be caused, and blisters can be caused by various reasons. And the information offered on these two pieces, number one is they were sprayed. Is that correct? And number two, 3 different glazes were used, and they were commercial glazes. So I'd like to talk a little bit about commercial glazes relative to, let's call them homemade glazes, glazes from scratch.
Okay, this was actually a submittal by one of our members.
Yeah, excuse me, it was not sprayed. They were not sprayed. They were painted on.
Brushed on?
Brushed on, yes.
Was the center poured?
No, nothing was poured.
Oh, you brushed the center as well?
Everything was painted on.
Wow, okay. Generally speaking, oh, I see. So you used a brush to apply the 3 different glazes.
Correct. And I do that a lot with all of my stuff, and I just have problems with it once in a while. It's not always. And this was the worst I've ever gotten.
All right. How do you, what kind of brush do you use, number one?
A mop brushes.
Like string, oh, like foam?
No. Just here, I'll get one. I'm in my studio.
All right. This is what we have to do to try to process.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see the brush.
All right.
These are my brushes. They're just nice, kind of expensive brushes.
Are they sable?
No, but I mean, I do this all the time, and 95% of my stuff does not happen like that. It's just
All right.
rare.
Are they plastic bristles?
Nope.
They're
Excuse me?
okay. They look good and soft. They're really soft, right?
They're very soft. They work really great, and they're I think they're Fable. I'd have to I don't remember what they were.
But they're natural bristles.
Natural bristles, yes.
All right. Well, that's what you want to use. You don't want to use
It's
anything.
a natural goat hair mop brush.
Oh, all right. That's a good brush. What people tend to gravitate to are just those acrylic oil and acrylic painting brushes, and they don't apply enough material. They actually scrape off almost as much as they apply. So having a nice soft, full brush, bristle brush is really helpful for brushing. I do a lot of brushing too. One of the secrets to brushing is not letting your brush strokes dry before you get to the next one. When you have to brush fast enough so that you apply the glaze and it all dries together. If you let it dry in between each coat, your application is not as well controlled, and so you're getting different thicknesses. Are these commercial glazes?
Yes, they are. And when I talked to Laguna, they were telling me that I should put EPK in one of the glazes because it didn't melt enough.
That is an accurate suggestion. When you add EPK to a glaze, it will slow down its melt, and it will help you control the flow. But if the glazes are too thick or the firing is too slow, they will melt anyway, and they'll continue to flow. So do you fire with cones, or do you have a computerized skill?
I have a computer, but I put cones in. Would it make a difference to put a hold on it at the end?
There's it's a mixed choice, because if you put a hold on it, it will help things smooth out. But if your kiln continues to climb in temperature, it allows for more flow.
So it might drip more.
And then it'll kind of run too far. I never use a computerized kiln, not because I think they're terrible, but I like to know that I'm controlling the firing and that I know what the heats are at the different stages. And I know that not through a digital readout, but by color and by the cones. And I never leave a kill that I'm firing. So I'm always present, always checking it, doing something else in the studio while it's firing. And it gives me a better sense of what's going on than if you have a computer which will fire for you. It'll do exactly what it says it'll do, but it doesn't really give you what's actually happening. It's just giving you a mechanical program. Hopefully everything is happening accordingly. So if your glazes are too thick, or if okay, let's go back, because how your glazes fit on your pot, because you've used these glazes before successfully.
All the time.
Yeah. So how, what temperature did the Bisque at?
04.
Okay. That's good, because then it won't hold as much material when you apply it. When you brush your layers on, do you let the shine disappear before you put your next layer on?
Usually, yes.
Good.
But again, it's like it doesn't always happen. So
Can I interject that I had the exact same problem with the exact same glaze and exactly only that glaze that Ellen is having?
it was a forest green. Did I put it on there? Yeah, nebula.
It's for me, it's Nebula does it sometimes, not always, but
Yeah.
Now, is Nebula the one you used as well?
Yes.
it's Laguna Nebula.
No, but Wynn said that he had a little bit of a problem with one of the glazes that are commercial. Was it Nebula? Is Wynn here?
Yeah.
I was muted. No, it's not. I don't use that glaze.
All right. I haven't used any of these glazes. I really am mixing all of my own glazes and have for quite a while. And I know that I had worked in a ceramic supply store for a number of years in San Francisco. So I learned about how they mix their commercial glazes. And the differences between a commercial glaze and a batch glaze that one would mix up themselves is that they add a lot of texture materials to make the texture consistent, to keep it in suspension, and to give it a certain adhesion and a certain viscosity. And all of those additives tend to make them very thick. When you open the jar, you shake it up, it's usually much thicker than a glaze that you would want to make in a bucket.
We both use these as dry glazes.
Oh, so you add your own water.
Right.
So you're saying, though, it's very possible that the Nebula was thicker. Maybe I should keep it a little bit thinner, the Nebula glaze, since
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Usually blisters are caused by overfiring or too thick a glaze that hasn't been able to smooth out. But if you reached temperature and your cycle was slow enough, it should have. Now, are these in the same kill load as the ones that worked out just fine?
I would have no idea. I
That
don't know.
might matter.
Yeah.
Because it could have been that firing. It could also be how you stack the kill. If it's a very sparse stack, if it's a lot of space between things, they're not going to hold the heat the same, and they'll cool faster and maybe not resolve as well at the top temperature.
You know, my kilns are usually packed, so that wouldn't be the case. They're packed.
Okay.
But it could be that maybe it didn't reach, I don't know, because it's never looked like that before. But like the one on the right side has only 1 or 2 little blisters. And that's happened before with quite a few of my things. And I just refire it and it's fine.
Right.
And when I refire it, is it necessary to actually put more glaze over it? Or is it fine just to just put it in? I usually put a little glaze over it to sort of smooth it.
Right on the blister.
It is, okay.
You can dab it, but if it looks like the clay itself is covered with glaze, it just has a blister on top of it. If there's glaze in that blister, touching the clay body, you don't need to add more to it.
Okay.
And often refiring does resolve some of these things.
Yeah, it usually does.
Okay. So it could be that that particular glaze, the blue one, needs to be more. And also it matters which one you put on first. Do you change your order?
I do, yes.
Has that had anything to do with it?
I'd have to think about that because Nebula is a constant glaze I use with a lot of different things. So, and another one is Castile that I use a lot of. So.
Right. Well, what I always do is a tiny little sketch of the piece with the measurements, the Bisque temperature, and how I apply the glaze with what, like you have a brush, and which one I put on first, second, or third, or if I go back and put something else over. And then whether you put one glaze on top of another or underneath another will definitely affect the effect.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like if you have a high fire glaze and you want
Can't go out. No.
want what? If you want the white to come up through like a temoku, it won't happen if you put the white on top. The temoku will come up through the white if you put it on the bottom. You follow?
Right. Yeah, I understand.
They bubble through
All right.
from the bottom up. So this is the next one, which is I think Wynn's pieces. These. Wynn, would you tell me what kind of glaze the not the copper matte, but the other one is like? What kind of surface it has?
I don't know if he's distracted.
Okay.
Let me see.
Oh, somehow I got muted somehow. So they're both commercial glazes. They're glazes that I use that get used where I teach in Ventura at the Vita Art Center. They get used there. And so I've used them a few times at home. These are from firings at home. I fired a cone 6 occasionally. And
the vitrified clay pipe sewer line was invaded by tree roots. Oh,
somebody is having a conversation in the background.
I got it, Wynn.
Okay. So I bisque, and these were fired in, it's a gas kiln, so it's not an electric kiln. And it's not on every piece. It's almost always on the outside, not the inside. And if I refire them, nothing changes.
Yeah. So the copper matte is obviously a dry glaze. What's the other one?
It's also, I mix them dry. I buy them as a dry glaze, but they're matte. They're both matte glazes.
Both matte.
The copper one's more green, the agate is more blue.
And when they come out right, the whole thing has like a shadings of those colors.
Right.
Yeah. And only on a few pieces. All right. So when you make your pieces, do you sponge them when you're finished before you let them dry?
I don't know what you mean. When I make them?
Yeah, after you trim them, if it's on the outside.
Yes. So
After
trimming, yes, I do.
You sponge them?
Yep, I sponge it and use a rubber rib to smooth it off.
Okay. Do you make an effort to press down the sand so that the surface is smooth?
Yep.
Okay, because my first thought, after a lot of thought, was that the sand is not absorbing the glaze. It's not holding it. And if it's been sponged, there's no clay particles on top of the sand, and it's actually not able to glaze.
Well, when I tool it, you can see you see some sand, but also the surface sand has been pulled out. So there are little pock marks in the clay. And I wet it, and then I use a rubber rib to smooth it off. So it's a semi-burnished surface when I'm done.
These really
But it's possible. It's clay that this is B mixed with sand.
Right. And sand is not like grog. Sand is
Yeah, it's not porous, right?
not porous or absorbent.
Possible, yeah.
If it's sitting on top, it wouldn't really be able to grab on to any of that glaze. It would just, the glaze would have to be thick enough to just coat it.
But
And-
this is, so, this is up near the, far higher up though, on the side of the pot. I don't tool my pots much. I throw, so I don't have to tool that much. So nothing would be tooled this far up the side of a bowl.
All right, so it's just been thrown. But if you,
Yeah.
if you sponge it, it will bring the sand to the surface.
Yeah, I don't, when I
Okay.
make it, I don't. No, it's either my fingers or a rib that's the last thing that's on the surface.
Is it a rubber rib?
Wooden,
Wooden rib? Okay, 'cause a metal rib will scrape.
yeah.
And you say you tried to fill those pot marks with glaze.
Yeah.
Did you try,
Refired them,
did you
nothing.
try spraying over the surface again?
I'm sorry, spraying over or glazing the whole thing? I didn't try, I have not tried just reglazing the whole thing again.
Well, just the areas that were like difficult?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like take and rub glaze into the holes, so the holes are full of glaze. And refire, and they come out with the same holes.
It's really odd. And neither one of your glazes seems to have much flux in it. They're really dry, right?
Yeah,
The other suggestion I thought was, if you take some Guernsey borate and you make like a really thin wash where it doesn't really create much shine, but it does create a layer of flux, you could
mhm.
try putting that on first and then do your regular spraying and seeing if that would help everything kind of close up.
Yeah, these are not sprayed, they're probably poured.
You don't think it's dust?
No, I don't think it's dust. I mean, I don't wipe everything with a sponge, but I look at my fingers or I use a towel, and if I'm getting dust on my fingers with a towel, then I'll take a damp sponge. Yeah.
I was told that a long time ago that a damp sponge leaves sponge residue and it can cause
It
problems.
could be, it could be. But these, I have no way of knowing, but it's rare that I do anything other than, blow inside the pot if there's anything there, wipe it out with my hand. Yeah. And this, I mean, these are just oddities, like this, maybe 1 out of 10 or 12 pots will come out like this with these glazes. The rest of the time they're fine.
That's 10%, right?
Yeah. And it just,
Take a couple of them and just for fun, I would probably want to see what a Guernsey borate would do. Just a thin wash, so when it dries, you can still see through it.
so put it on the pot under the glaze or over the glaze? Under the glaze.
Glaze. And so when
Okay.
it dries, it just looks like a haze. It's not opaque at all.
Yeah, I'll try that.
And then do your regular glazing and see if that doesn't help everything move where it needs to go.
Okay.
The other thing I would try is just for fun is to take it someplace else and put some Guernsey borate over what you have here and see what happens. But not a lot. I mean, it's a really, certainly at high temperatures, it doesn't take anything to melt.
Right. So I get it just like a really thin wash.
Right.
Got it.
It'll look like a salt glaze if you just fired it without anything. Yeah.
What is Guernsey borate?
Guernsey borate is a naturally occurring material that contains boron, which is not usually found in other raw materials, and silica, and what else? Sodium. It's a soda-based material, and it's a very interesting one. It's been used since colemanite mine went down. When they stopped mining colemanite, it was the material of choice to substitute for colemanite. So a lot of the cone low fire and cone 6 glazes use Guernsey borate as their flux. And I have found that it's really fun to try using it as a wash to get a sheen on a surface that you don't want to glaze, that you just want the clay to have a little more life to it. And then you could also tint it just like anything else. and because it's a soda-based material, it's very responsive to reduction. And it helps colors do things that they wouldn't do in other kinds of glazes. For my luster glazes, it's a real go-to. Anything soda-based is great for the luster glazes I use. Which also leads me to a little tangent. Most high fire glazes use feldspar, and it's usually itemized as feldspar as a generic. And which feldspar you choose for your recipes matters. And there's 3 basic types of feldspars: the soda, the potash base, and a lithium base. And because soda, potash, and lithium affect color, you would want to choose the feldspar that would help enhance the colors you're looking for. And that's textbook stuff. It's easy to find that information. Robin Hopper goes into good detail in his book. Most ceramic textbooks will give you a rundown of materials and what they tend to want to do for you. And it really helps to learn about them and what's in them. The more you do it, the more they become your friend and they become helpers to accomplish what you're looking to do. I will tell everybody this. When I went to college, or even in high school, I didn't want to take chemistry because I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I had an aptitude for chemistry, and nobody told me any different. And I was taking ceramics, right? Well, I would take glaze classes and I would be taught the empirical formula and the different components and what the abbreviations were, the letters for each ingredient and all that stuff. And I could not hold on to it. My mind just didn't want to maintain that information. But when I had to teach glaze theory, I took a different approach. I took an approach where you use the materials that will help you get where you want to go. Instead of being mathematical, it was more informational and intuitive. And it really works. And it can take you into the details. It can take you to learn the chemistry of things without the pain of having to be a very scientific mind. And it opened up doors of amazement to me because the chemicals we use in ceramics are the chemicals we eat to be healthy. They're the chemicals that make the world go round. They're used in medicine. They're used for plants to grow. I mean, the same materials are universal that we use in ceramics. And we use heat and the combination of how they react together to make them do what they do, if we're lucky. So it's just been a wonderful adventure for me. It's unending. There is no way one person could learn all there is to know. No way. I keep trying. Just getting ready for this presentation, I learned all sorts of things. It's like a puzzle. And the more you know of the puzzle, the easier it is to find the pieces that complete it. And when I follow links and when I looked up, I went through my box of glaze. I have like recipe cards, these things here, like these. And I have all on these cards. And I went through them, especially the cone 10 and the cone 6 ones, because most of you are working at those temperatures. And the patterns are emerging, like I have for the Celadon. We'll get back to it when we get to those Celadon bowls. I have all sorts of really interesting kinds of observations that are easy. It makes glaze formulation easy. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be a glaze with 10 ingredients. It can start with 1 ingredient and you can add one thing at a time, and it can take you a long, long way down the rabbit hole. And it's fun.
So let's look at the next problem.
Next. This is my first reaction to this. And is this person here who made this piece?
I think they are. Let me
Hello,
see.
I'm here.
Are you here?
You see me? Yes, it's me.
Oh, good. Because I wanted to ask you if you'd used these glazes before.
Yes, I did, and I use them regularly. But this piece was not small hole. It was like big craters.
It was volcanic, right?
Yeah.
How did you apply the glaze?
I was dipping. I dipped it in 2 glazes.
With the blue first and then the white one after?
Yes.
Okay. And are they commercial glazes?
Yes.
All right. And are they straight out of the bottle?
Excuse me?
Did you dilute them down at all?
I don't remember.
Are they dry? Are they dry glazes or do they come in a bottle?
Yes, they are dry and they're in a big bucket, so I use them for dipping and for brushing.
But you see,
They
that's
do, they don't have any additional stuff.
Okay. And do you remember if they were especially thick when you used them?
No, it was very thin glaze.
But it is Nebula, which is the same one that Lagoon is.
Yeah, the top one was Nebula.
But that's
I would love
that's
in that nebular glaze. I would love to know what the ingredients are to think about why that particular glaze wants to bubble so much. When you mix your buckets, you stir them up really good, right?
Yes.
And then do you use your hand to see how thick they are?
No, I'm very new to this glazing thing.
I put my finger in the stirred up glaze. It coats my finger. Like you would a sauce or a custard. If it coats the spoon, it's ready, you know? So if it coats your finger and you can still see your skin through it a little bit, you're probably at the right thickness. If you see too much skin or if you can't see any skin, you've got either too much or too little water.
Myra, I don't know if this will help you understand the Nebula Blue, but it is a very runny glaze. It runs a lot. That whole family of glazes.
A lot of flux. That's why they suggested you add clay. You can add easily 10%. It's a cone 6 glaze?
Yes.
All right, so you can easily add 10% to that glaze to slow it down, and it probably wouldn't change it very much if it's very runny. So how do you make 10% of, you have dry glaze, so you can weigh it up.
But what are you adding? I didn't catch what you were adding.
Clay, you would add kaolin, EPK.
PK, okay.
Yeah. And you know, when you have fit problems, this is not so much a fit problem. We'll get to that later, but yeah, I would just use plain, you know, kaolin. You might want to use Edgar plastic rather than Graulig. You wouldn't want to use Graulig. In terms of kaolin, Graulig is more plastic, and it might be easier to melt, and you don't want that quality. You want the stiffening quality. So just plain EPK would be good. But as long as you have powder, you can weigh up whatever it is, and then 10%, just add the clay to it and mix it up really good and add your water. And then don't put it on too thick. Know that because it runs, you have to adjust how much you know, your bucket should not be too thick, and probably thinner in terms of water content than the other glaze you're using. The other thing is when you dip, you're double dipping, right? Or pour, yeah, you're double dipping. Are you double dipping?
I put like spots. It's not second layer was just the spots of this nebula glaze. You can see stripes of this flow. So it was not a whole layer of glaze. It was just spots.
Now this is the inside, right?
Yes.
And does it happen on the outside too?
Yes, it did.
All right. Did it run off?
No.
Oh, interesting. So you dip the whole thing inside and out into the bucket, right?
Yes.
All right.
First glaze was covering whole pot.
And what is porcelain?
Um,
What does it say here?
I think it was soldate 60.
Oh, okay. And okay. Of all the clays, soldate 60 gives me the, in my experience with my workshops and my classes, soldate 60 at lower temperatures, because it is a cone 10 clay, will be more inclined to bubble. I don't know why, but it just is. But the first reaction I have to this is that you have too much glaze on it. It's too thick. It looks like it's like deep. It's like you could measure how thick the bottom is of the glaze on top of the clay. It shouldn't have too much thickness, you know, physical thickness when it's finished. It's just a thin layer.
Can I say, I was trying to refire it second time. So probably the next time it was too thick, but it has the same pattern of bubbles.
And when if you refired it, did it go away?
No,
No.
it was after second firing. It was the same pattern of bubbles.
If you refire something that's too thick, it's going to do it again.
Okay.
Yeah. And what my recommendation would be is dip the first one, make sure it's not too thick a glaze in the bucket. Let it dry at least until the shine is gone, right? But not totally dry. It should feel cool, but it shouldn't be wet. And then when you dip the second glaze, take it out right away. Don't leave it sitting in the bucket. Put it in, take it out.
Okay.
If you hold it in the bucket too long, it's going to soak up too much glaze.
Okay. The last question. So second firing will not heal this holes and bubbles, right?
It won't help if it's too thick.
Okay.
The other question that you might ask yourself is, what temperature did you bisque the clay at?
It was cone 06.
06?
Yes.
Okay. With the soldate, which is a high temperature glaze, a clay, you might want to bisque at 05 or even a little higher, and then it won't absorb so much glaze when you put it on.
Okay.
But you have to, because it's not so porous, you have to let it dry a little bit longer between dips.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
I want to know how all these suggestions turn out. Yes.
How much does it matter if in the bisque fire, if it's fired to the point of all the gases releasing, or if some of the gases remain and then they come up when it's glazed? It isn't the glaze, it's the gas in the clay body that hasn't been purged from it during the bisque.
It will matter. That can be alleviated though if you're finding that you're getting that interruption in the surface because of the gases escaping, and especially for slow moving glazes. It might also be a reason for pinholing. If you fire slow enough, like 200 to 300 degrees an hour, all the way up to about 1400 degrees, that will give those organics a chance to escape without interfering with a glaze that's already started to melt. If you fire too fast through the quartz inversion, which is anywhere from 900 to 1250 or 1300, those gases can escape easily and they will interfere with your glaze. So it's really important for you when you fire to make sure that that period of time is called quartz inversion from about 900 to about 1300 to play it safe. Be very slow, not more than 200 degrees an hour, even on a glaze firing, especially on a bisque firing, but even on a glaze firing. And that will take out those organics that cause interference. And then on a glaze firing, generally speaking, you can go a lot faster. You can go 300-400 degrees an hour fairly safely.
I have a question about during the firing and keeping the peepholes open. How much air do you let escape to let all that stuff escape before quartz inversion? Especially
on a bisque firing, you want to leave the top peephole open so that those gases can just clear out.
Okay, so only one peephole is going to be enough.
That's all you need.
Okay.
And also, when you're cooling your kill, it's also important to go slowly through that period of time from 1300 down to 900. You want that to be a slow. You don't want to open your kill too soon because that'll cause all sorts of glaze flaws. And it can cause your clay actually to crack. Quartz inversion is a very interesting physical reaction to heating up the materials that we use. And they actually go from an alpha state, whatever that means, to a beta state, chemistry-wise. And they go back through that transitional state, going up and going down. And it makes a big difference in, not all the time. I mean, a lot of people fire really fast and they get just fine. But down the line, the glazes can interrupt themselves. They can crack easily. They aren't as they're more fragile. The integrity of the crystalline structure of the clay and the glazes is changed by not cooling it properly. It's called tempering in a way. Yeah. We can talk more about firing because it is critical to the success of your glazes. But let's get through some of these things first.
One quick question with that. When you say that you have to go through these stages, if you have a kiln that's programmable, is that part of the programming or does that override that series of changes?
Program your kiln so that it doesn't go too fast during that temperature range.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I like seeing this glaze because celadons are one of my favorite glazes. They just make my heart beat. And I wanted to ask if Gloria's here.
No, Gloria is someplace traipsing around Europe right now.
Oh, that's too bad. All right, well, I have a bunch of celadon recipes that are very easy to mix, and they have like 3 or 4 ingredients, and then they can be tinted any way you want for her and for anybody else who's interested in doing celadons. I also have my very favorite celadon recipe here, and I will share it with you. If you're interested, I can give that information to Foz, and she can send it out. But celadons are called celadon initially from China. They migrated to Korea and then into Japan in that order. China has the oldest history, thousands and thousands of years of having control over all types of clays and all kinds of glazes. And their celadons are still unsurpassed, as are the shigaragi pieces. The history behind Asian ceramics is very long and very interesting. I'd love to talk about that for a whole hour, but to keep it short, celadons were identified basically because they looked like jade, and jade was a very treasured gemstone and still is. And so they come in the colors of jade as well. There's celadons in blues and greens and dark greens, light greens. amber, brown, any glaze that has a particularly waxy, smooth, deep surface with color changes because of high and lows on the piece is been called a celadon. They have a particular recipe base that's very similar with some adjustments. It changes the quality of the surface and also how the crystals inside the glaze form during the firing. So one of my favorite is called a Kyushu. No, not that. No, here it is. Let's see what it says. I keep thinking of Kyushu Ohara as a good one, but let's see. I have notes. Kauai celadon, and these are named for where they originated. In China, they have a clay, a feldspatic clay that's called patunci, and it's a feldspatic rock that's made into clay, and it occurs only in 2 places in China. I tried to get some at one time, and they won't export it. It's from the southeast part of China, and also there's a deposit on the southwest part of China. The closest clay that we have to it in the Western world is graulig from England. And it's a plastic porcelainous clay that's used in all of their porcelain, in either completely or in mixed in with other types of things for whatever process and product they want to create. The biggest deposit of patunci is near Zhendashen. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it's the porcelain center in China, and they're still producing incredible porcelain ceramics all the time. I mean, it's the go-to place if you want to see porcelain, experience porcelain. So because of that, Chinese porcelains cannot be duplicated because the materials are unique, and any place where it's local ingredients, you aren't going to be able to duplicate, but you can simulate, or you can use it as a jumping off point for other things. So we have graulig porcelain, which if you've used it, you know it throws differently than the other porcelain bodies you can buy. Some people adore it. Some people are frustrated by it. That's okay. So the other thing that Chinese people would do is they would glaze their porcelain pieces with a slip made from the same patunci clay. And in doing so, they could single fire them, and the glaze would suit the piece. It would have no shrinkage differential from the body to the decoration, and they could color it any color they wanted with the materials they could find locally to do that. One of the most common ingredients for coloring high fire reduction glazes is iron. Red iron oxide is the go-to material. It's used commonly to create the greens and the yellows and the different colors that you can get in celadon glazes, depending on the feldspar you use. If you use a potash feldspar, you're going to get one color with the same amount of iron. And if you use a lithium feldspar, it'll help you get some blues and some lighter greens. You can also take a base of a celadon glaze and tint it with different colorants to get variations. One thing I noticed was if you use copper in a celadon glaze, it's going to be muted like you see in these bowls. If you use just iron in the proper celadon base glaze recipe, it will give you more of a green color. But the copper goes into this more grayed out, earth toned, almost color. It's not bright. The Kauai celadon is sky blue absolutely robin's egg blue almost, but pastel. It's just beautiful. And because this is a cone 6 Celadon, it's rather shiny. And you'll find that most Celadons that are fired in electric kilns at lower temperatures will be more shiny. And you can control that by what you add to the recipe. And because this is also a batch recipe from scratch, you can actually control how much shine it is, and you can control the color. So the base recipe is here. And because when you would have a high temperature Celadon glaze, the min spar and the Gersley borate would just be some feldspar. It wouldn't be necessary to have both. They most all have whiting, which is calcium, and they will all have clay, and they will all have silica. And those are the basic ingredients for Celadon glazes. If you add more clay, you're going to get a slower moving, drier surface. And if you use more flux, which would be in this case Gersley borate, you're going to get a shinier surface. Zinc oxide will add a certain textural quality to it. There was one glaze we had at the college that was called high zinc, and it was like glacier blue. It was just breathtaking. And it had a lot of zinc in it. So it would be fun to experiment with this recipe with more or less zinc and see what happens. So if you add copper, you're muting your colors, whether you know it or not. If you use iron, you can get a pretty good green out of almost, especially if there's Gersley borate in it. You'll get more green if you just use iron. And this is fired in reduction, right?
Oxidation.
Oxidation. Oh, okay. So copper is going to respond green if it's going to respond to anything in oxidation. If you put copper in a Celadon glaze and you fire reduction, you're going to get the other colors of copper, which is it could be copper red for all you, it could turn into a copper red glaze.
Okay.
If you use iron in oxidation, it will tend to not go brown. It'll tend to go golden or yellow or tan. So it's almost like using rutile. It's not going to go into Celadon colors automatically in oxidation. And so you're getting the copper green color from the oxidation rather than you would get it from the iron in high temperatures. And application is the difference between these two bowls. The thicker the glaze, the deeper the color. That's a real simple rule with Celadons. As long as you get a surface, that's just an aesthetic decision. You can also stain the bisque with a colorant, even a mason stain.
No.
And just put it into your pattern so that it kind of antiques it, and then wipe off where you don't want the stain, and then apply the glaze, and it will enhance the texture and add color. So if she wanted blue, she could stain the color, the pattern with blue, a wash of blue cobalt, probably carbonate, very, very mild. Cobalt's a very strong, dependable colorant. And then she could put the Celadon over it, and it would add all sorts of dimension to the color in the pattern, just as is. A lot of options.
All right.
Okay.
Let's see. There we go.
Okay, so one of the conversation spots that I had was this wonderful cup. It's nicely thrown. Standard glaze, we all know of Santa Barbara white. On a dark clay, it responded perfectly. And after a period of time, it started to crackle on the bottom. And the first thing I asked her was, do you put it in the dishwasher? When we get to vitrification, I have some examples to clarify some of this conversation. But this would not be unexpected, because if there is any weakness or even just wear and tear on a good piece, and you saturate it with very hot, steamy water, and then it dries, and then you do it again, and over, it stresses out the integrity of the structure of the clay as well as the glaze. And as soon as the glaze starts to fracture just a little bit, it allows more of that steamy hot water into the clay body, which expands it and contracts it and causes this back and forth action that will wear it out. And it's not unusual, especially with the more matte glazes. The shiny glazes, not too shiny, but the more glossy glazes will tend to be free of that. So it's not going to be a problem where it's going to fall apart. It's not going to be a sanitary problem. If you don't like to see the lines of the crackle too much, or you're worried about bacteria, you can just fill it with some water and put in a very tiny amount of Clorox, and it'll bleach it out and kill the bacteria, and you're back to start over. But it will eventually not let the piece ring. When you take your pieces out of the kiln and they're high fired, stoneware, if they're vitrified, they're going to ring like that. If you wear them out in the just by age and use, the same stoneware won't ring. Even though it's stoneware, it doesn't sound like it's been high fired or vitrified. So we'll talk more about that later. I tell people, and they say, well, I've done it forever and it doesn't bother my pieces, but I tell them hand wash the handmade pieces.
I was just going to ask you, what do you think about dishwasher? I know we always say it's dishwasher safe, but I always think, why do you want to put that in a dishwasher?
Well, I know. I know. I think handling the piece, washing the piece, I think that's part of the mystique of having it. But some people just want to just wash it all. I don't know. It's deadly. Compromise the piece eventually. You know, if you go to Edith Hayes wear, her pieces will be much more, they'll have much more longevity under stress, because she has to, her glazes were formulated. And when I was in college, we went to visit her, and I met her in her Sausalito factory, and she spoke with us as students, and personal tour. It was really special. And how she had to go to such great lengths to get them approved as a commercial pottery, to prove that they weren't going to scratch, they weren't going to craze or crackle, and they were going to be food safe, and that they would withstand, you know, everyday types of stresses. I don't think we had microwave ovens at the time, but my guess is that they're really safe anyway. And they've kept her tradition alive, and her pieces are very durable and very consistent.
I actually have some of Edith Hayes' ware. I have a whole dinnerware set that we bought when we were first married almost 60 years ago.
Wow.
And we still use it.
Yes. And they're not showing any wear, are they?
No.
I know. She was brilliant, and she had such a hard time.
Fabulous.
People did not want to give her full credit. It was an uphill battle for her, and she was very stubborn and very successful, very brilliant.
She did not do high fire work.
Well, it wasn't earthenware.
Yep.
And she had gas kilns.
Right.
Yeah. No, she really knew everything there was to know. She created all those glazes and the clay.
Right.
Yeah. It was cool. All right, so then we have crackles, and another word here it was using is crazing. And when crackles occur, they're often classified as a glaze flaw. And then they became an aesthetic attribute. Certainly, if you're familiar with Raccoon work, you know that there are crackle glazes, and you want to see those crackles, and you actually shock the piece before it, while it's at its hot point when you pull it out of the kiln, and then you put it in the smoke, and then you plunge it into cold water just to get those crackles to work and to show up against the blackened clay. So crackles have become something more than a glaze flaw. Crazing indicates that it's a flaw, and what that means is that it's fractured. One of my greatest light bulbs of crazing was when I pulled a piece of my lusterware out of the kiln too soon because I was in a hurry, and no matter how many years you do this, you just can't wait. And I watched it craze, which meant that the most beautiful turquoise mottled lustered surface had this crack down it. And I watched it form. It went right through the clay right through the glaze to the clay and caused a line, a broken line, a crack. And that's called crazing at its worst form. Crackles are a glaze fit issue, as well as a firing consideration.
Hey, Nancy, you're sharing your screen.
Okay. So if you have a crackle glaze and you want crackles, you want to even stain those crackles to make the pattern even more enhanced. If you get crackles and you don't want them, you need to either adjust the clay you're using or the recipe for the glaze, because what it tells you is that the glaze is shrinking more during the firing and the cooling process than the clay. And so it just can't stay smooth. It has to like crack to stay on. The worst of crackling would be shivering, where it comes off. It just comes loose. This is an extreme case of crawling. My guess is, Foz, you don't know who did this or what or anything about it?
Correct.
Yeah. It can be caused by a number of things. It can be caused by glazing a piece that's very, very thin and with a very thick application. The bisque is not absorbent enough to hold it on because it saturates before the glaze adheres. Like if you have a thin porcelain bisque piece and you glaze it in a bucket and the glaze is nice and thick and it gives you the coat you want, when it dries, it could actually start to come loose, resembling this pattern. So if you're glazing something that's low, very thin, and that was bisque to an appropriate temperature, I would pour the inside, let it dry so that the bisque has a chance to still have some absorbency characteristics. If it's too wet to absorb any more water, by glazing the outside at that point, it can't hold the glaze on the surface. It just doesn't have the pull power to take the water out of the glaze so it adheres to the surface. The other thing is that the recipe is not good, and it needs probably a little bit more flux. And if you like the crawling pattern and you want it to stick on a little bit better, a lot of people have beautiful crawl patterns. What's his name from Red Dragon Pottery?
Troy. He
has a beautiful crackle glaze that seems flawless. And it doesn't seem to matter what he puts it on. It always is perfect. And it doesn't look like it's peeling off. But you can add stabilizers such as CMC gum or what is the other stuff? Any kind of gum. I don't like to use gum Arabic, which is what we started with when I was a beginner because it molds. So I really like CMC gum. And it's a powder, you can add a percentage of it to your glaze, and it'll help adhere it. And it will also be helpful if you're reglazing something that's been glaze fired. It helps it stick on. And it also gives you a nice kind of hard surface that won't want to fall off when you touch it with your fingers before you put it in a kiln. Anybody have any responses to any of all this talk?
It's wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Helpful?
Yes.
You know, I was telling Foz, I think we could spend a week on each one of these things. You know, if we had a glaze seminar meeting once a week, we could really investigate all these possibilities and where they could go, and how they could really be used to be exciting alternatives to what we expect to see happen.
It would be nice if we could take your glaze theory class that you used to teach.
I miss that class a lot.
Oh, I think you ought to reoffer it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a really wonderful period of time. We did a lot of things. We got a mural in Cuba, installed in Cuba, that the class made. We then made another mural that the Museum of Ventura, the Ventura County Museum has in a private collection. And we each made our own tiles, and we made one large mural based on the different shapes that we each made. And they all followed a theme. It was really an exciting time. And because the people in the class were all doing kind of what they liked to do, but they brought their results to the group, we all learned from everybody's personal experiments, and we were able to augment our knowledge base and our experience with everybody else's. And it was a incredible growing time. I mean, we learned so much. We did a lot of things. We did salts. We did different temperature firings, different types of firings, all of it. We explored a lot of different things. It was really fun.
So I'm gonna suggest that we jump here, and I think we've got just a couple more slides to go through.
Okay.
So this is a question that I know that has come up in discussions that I've been involved in.
Yeah. When you asked me the question, I was quick to answer. I really feel that if you're going to pursue ceramics and you want to be cost efficient, that you mix your own glazes. Or blend them with commercial glazes when you want a particular type of glaze that you can just do. There's some commercial glazes that would be very hard to invent or emulate at home.
But I think one of the things too that we talked about is, you know, a lot of times if you're looking at glaze recipes, you know, we had John Britt talked to us last year, and, you know, if you go through one of Britt's books, you know, some of his recipes have 10, 12, 15 components into the glaze. And when you and I were talking, you know, you have kind of a different strategy about how to begin this.
Right. Yeah, if you want to try making your own glazes, the simplest way, what we did in the glaze class was the first assignment was to go out someplace local, find a clay deposit, which we discussed how you do that, collect the clay and make a clay body out of it. Sometimes you didn't have to like go through a lot of trouble. You just took out the rocks and you let it dry and you pulverize it so that you can weigh it up. And then you also make a little bit of clay out of it, and you make tiny little thumb cups, you know, maybe an inch and a half tall and across. And then you make a saucer for each one out of stoneware clay, and you put them into the bisque firing. One, you do three. You take one and you put it in the bisque firing on a saucer. And the saucer should have sides, because by the time you get to cone 5 and cone 10, you'll have one on each saucer and they'll start melting. And by cone 10, you have yourself a glaze. It can be that simple. it's you take any earthenware clay, it should melt into a glaze at cone 10. You can take what we used to have was Albany slip clay, and it's a powdered clay from Albany, New York. You would add water to it, and you could apply it to a greenware porcelain piece, biscuit, put it in the cone 10 firing, and it would come out this incredible, beautiful temoku. And if you cooled the kill really slowly, you would get crystalline, you would get sometimes gold speckles, you'd get, tea dust. I mean, it was depending on the firing. So you could start with a clay like that. When I was at Mills, we had a graduate student that did his whole master's thesis using Albany slip glazes and altering the color by adding different ingredients that would bleach it. He'd add cobalt to it, so he would have clay base, didn't need anything else except modifiers. And we all learned what the modifiers did, like rutile and tin and cobalt and copper, all that reacted with just the clay. It can be that simple. And there's a couple of slip clays. If you look them up, Albany slip as we knew it is no longer available, but there's other things that are considered equivalent. They might need a little more adjustment, but they're usable. The other thing you can do is what the Chinese people did, is that they would take ash and they would add it to their clay and make a material that would be painted on their pots, and it would create a glaze. Just those two ingredients. Then they got fancy and they added some silica. And then they started getting surface enhancements and more control. But the three ingredients basically are flux, clay, and silica. And some recipes, certainly for high temperature, it's really easy. You can do 1:1 and you can get yourself what's considered a glaze base. If you raise the clay and you minimize the flux, you can get a more matte glaze. If you add more flux, you get a more glossy glaze. It can boil down to just that. And clay is your stabilizer. The flux is your first ingredient, which could be Guernsey borate for cone 6 or a feldspar for cone 10. And the kind of clay you choose, if you use ball clay, it lowers the temperature in comparison to using a kaolin, which will raise the temperature. And then silica. If you use a fine mesh silica, it'll melt more quickly and create maybe a shinier glaze. And if you use the standard 325 mesh, it would be, more what we're used to seeing. And those are your basic rules for making a glaze. So depending on the temperature, like for low temperature glazes, like for the lusters, frits are used a lot. And frits are basically man-made feldspars. They're made into a mixture of all the ingredients that are in a feldspar, which is some flux, some neutral, and some silica. And they melt at a lower temperature. And they're fairly predictable. There are some frits that are used at higher temperatures. Some have a larger range of melt, and some are specific for one or the other. And then Guernsey borate has a bigger range, a mid-range, and then you get into your feldspars higher up. And that's the ground rules for mixing a glaze. So if you know that clay is going to be like a binder, and you know that your flux is going to make it melt, you can play with your percentages. You can start out with 1:1, and you could change it up a little bit, even by 0.5%.
Okay.
That's a good question. Is this being recorded? I hope this is being recorded so that, because I have a bad memory.
I know, and the other thing is taking notes. If you're applying your glaze and you want to know what happened, if you're like me, you think you can remember, except after a while you don't, because it all becomes slightly blurred. You got to put down how you applied it, which glaze you put on where, and if it was kind of a thick application or not. If you spray, that's a whole different thing than if you dip and pour. If you brush, that's a whole nother story. Those are your main methods of application. how thick the piece is, so how much it will absorb and grab of the liquid glaze you're applying, and what temperature you bisqued at. Those are the variables. So if you're using a high temperature clay and you only bisque to cone 06, you're going to make a very porous piece. So if it's very thin, that's not so bad. But if it's thick, you might get too much glaze application in that situation. If you can picture that, I do it visually. I picture, you know, how much sponge can that bisque soak up of the water in the glaze. And if it becomes saturated, you got to stop until it's no longer saturated to apply more glaze. If you're spraying and you saturate the surface, it becomes crusty and it eventually might even crawl. It might not be able to hold all that fast, quickly applied glaze to the surface when it's fired. So all those different secrets and techniques are we got to be mindful. Okay, so if you have a base glaze and it gives you the surface you like, if it's a satin or a matte or a nice smooth gloss or a transparent or not transparent, which is called opaque, you can add any colorants to it. You can add the raw oxides like cobalt and copper or iron or nickel or manganese, any of those things. They'll give you specific colors in oxidation as opposed to reduction. And then you could add mason stains. You can pick any color mason stain. The thing about mason stains or any man-made stains, because they're stabilized with silica and they're fired like Fritz and ground, is that they will give you a chart of the different colors that you would choose from. And on the chart, they will tell you what glaze base they will perform better for you. Like if you want a particular color and the glaze base is not conducive for those colorants, it will give you something else than what you think you're getting. So you do have to do a little bit of study to know if you have an alkaline glaze or a potassium-based glaze, or if you have zinc, or if you have alumina in your glaze, because the mason stains will respond to those with those ingredients differently. So they have a certain requirement that you do a little bit of homework. The reds used to be really hard. If you go back to that slide of the stains, it used to be really hard to get those solid red colors and all that stuff, but those two-dimensional colors are stains. And stains will give you two-dimensional colors. By that, I mean that there's not much nuance in the change of color. Whereas if you use oxides, like the raw materials of cobalt or copper or iron, which are your most mutating colors, they will give you nuance. And you can use them in any base to see what they'll do. You can't go wrong. If you have expectation, you could be disappointed. But sometimes what you expect isn't as good as what you get. And it's your challenge to start to love what you get and understand why you got it. And then you're on a roll. These are some glaze tests that I made. And just real quick, the two on the bottom, the blue and the copper red, those are plates. I use Smart and Final paper, hard paper plates, the dessert plate size. And I roll out a slab and lay it in and let it get leather hard, and I'll draw lines. I usually divide them into 8. And you can use them in either divided into 8, or you can use them like this differently. And this is on the left, this is a Raccoon Glaze in oxidation, which gives you the blues from the copper, and a little bit of cobalt in that dark one. And then the one on the right with all the copper reds coming up is the same temperature in reduction. And so it gives you just a fast read on what will happen to copper and cobalt in a reduction atmosphere or in oxidation. And I made these up because they're some of the glazes I use from my luster workshop. I use some Raccoon glazes in these lusters, and how you fire your kill on the up cycle and the down cycle makes a difference in the glazes. Because the copper reds that you see here on the right plate are not the same as they would respond to in a Raccoon firing. They would look different. And then the plates on the top there, the one on the left is an experiment in Fritz. Each wedge, there's 8 wedges, is divided into 2 parts. On the left of the wedge is the frit in a glaze that a recipe with some clay and some silica. And basically that was it. And then the right side is the same amount of copper in each wedge. So I have 8 different frits. The wedge is divided into 2, the frit without the copper and with the copper. And you can see that the different frits will give you different results with your colorants. And I use copper because it's the most telling of how glazes respond to different materials. If you follow that, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the frit made a cream colored glaze on this one that's in the middle, right on top. And then with copper, it made silver. And the next one, the frit turned gray. And with copper, it started to like go golden. And on the whole thing, each one has a different frit with the same amount of copper. And it was time consuming, but it's fascinating. And time consuming means maybe half a day. It's not a lot of time to get a lot of results. And then the one on the right, each one is a different glaze, giving me different color options and different surfaces. I don't know if you can see it completely because of the windows to the participants. But I have a lot of test plates. I have piles of test plates. On the back of each test plate is the cone, the type of firing it was fired in, if it was oxidation or if it was a luster firing or if it was a high temperature oxidation or reduction. And each wedge is numbered. And then I have a notebook I keep with that information. And each plate also has like a number, like the year. For these were for the workshop. Maybe it was the 8th year or the 10th year. So it would have a 1, a 10-1, 10-2, 10-3, like that. And then I would say what kind of test it was. And then I would have a notebook that codes those different wedges so that I could refer back to them and find out what I did. All my plates are marked the same way. The information's on the back with like black stain as ink. And then in my notebook, a cross-reference for the information. Keeping notes is really important. I think I'm writing the best notes. I think I'm being so silly and so precise and I'm not missing anything. And then a year later, I go back and I said, what did I do? I'm still not as good about keeping notes as I'd like to be, because sometimes I'll go back to a glaze from 5 years ago because of those plates. I'm looking for a particular glaze and I looked at my notes and sometimes it doesn't make sense and it's frustrating. Taking good notes is important. I also do diagrams or photographs of my kill loads, where the pieces are located in the kill. I keep a firing schedule with temperature climb and hours and the arch of temperature climb up and cooling. So it's a graphic as well as a statement underneath it. It's a form we created for Ventura College. Every firing has a graph and a record of the firing. And I usually keep the cones to see how they look relative to the firing. I always use cones, even though I have a pyrometer. the cones are going to give you a whole lot more accurate read about what's truly happening to your clay and your glazes. A digital readout and electronic translation of temperature is not the same as what's happening to your clay and your glazes. And your stack matters. The temperature outside matters. If it's a Santa Ana day at like today at 97 degrees, it will fire the same schedule. It would look very different than after a good rain. The best firing weather is after a good rain.
We live in the wrong part of the world.
Yeah, we used to do Raccoon in the rain. It was so fun.
What does the rain have to do with it?
It's barometric pressure, and it changes how the heat responds. It's very. I'm not sure I know exactly as a scientific explanation, but I do know it has a lot to do with high pressure and low pressure, and how heat transfers. Yeah, it matters. So I always write down what kind of weather we're having when I fire. And see, and all of that gives you, maybe if you review it, some baselines. It gives you variables that you could deal with. And asking questions like, okay, we'll get to the next question. Vitrification. Okay. Vitrification by definition means glass-like. So it's taking the clay and the glaze to its highest point before it absolutely liquefies. And a good piece that's vitrified, I test all my pieces for vitrification with a finger hitting it. All right, so this, I want to show you this piece. Let's see if I can, there. It's unglazed. It's a black clay that I formulated. And I call it a low fire porcelain. And the reason I do that is because it is like porcelain. It throws worse than porcelain. It's almost impossible to throw. But it gives me this, which is like a thrill. Let's just put it that way. No glaze. All right, so that's vitrified. And it's vitrified at cone 04. If I fired it too high, it would start to bloat and melt. All right, this is a stoneware bowl. And it's a cone 910. And this is considered vitrified. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It rings, but it's low. Okay. So this is a porcelain cup with Ojeda glaze from Ventura College days. It's a little demi-tasse made out of porcelain. It's pretty high. It doesn't ring, but its tonality is high. Okay, so this one's the highest. This is a luster cup I did, hand built. It was a demo thing. Pretty high. Now this was cone 9 fired and refired with luster glaze. You can use these glazes. You can use any glaze from cone 10 down to 018 as long as you start with the highest one and your next firing is lower, so that the original glaze that it's going on top of is not melting when you add the next glaze. So you can, on top of this, this is on top of a cone 10 glaze, and it's fired at 04. And you could take anything that's high fired and put what the commercial luster glaze is at 018 without interfering. This is a bowl. This is my, makes me smile. I did a whole series of these bowls when I was making my living, my bread and butter with bowl sets and pottery at fairs, street fairs. This is an old bowl. I've been using it all these years. It still rings. The glaze is not crackled. It's nothing, no flaws. It's a low fire white talc clay. No frills, low fire. With envelopes and a clear glaze that was stated to be used at cone 04. I fired it to cone 01, and I get something that is vitrified and durable. So what temperature you fire your stuff at matters. And it's not just generally the designated temperature. I just took a chance and I thought I didn't want the earthenware sound. I would take it up a couple cones. All the pieces I made at that time don't ship, don't wear, and ring all these years later. So this is a nice salt glaze cup. One more. This is salt glaze cup. One of my favorites. Really, really nice. It was a probably cone 9, 10 salt glaze, and on a stoneware clay that's good for salt. You know, the different clays are more conducive to different firing techniques. No ring. It's probably 30 years old. And I never put it in the dishwasher. But it's not falling apart. It doesn't show wear. It just doesn't ring anymore. So vitrification is a very interesting topic. Here's a porcelain bowl from Ventura College. One of the students made bowl sets. That's nice. It's musical. So how you throw it? If you've got even, even walls and even floor and a good foot, will also help with the tonality of the ring. If it's fired to vitrification, depending on what temperature it was made for, and the glaze fit. A lot of stuff, huh? Okay. So let's hope that you did the firing. If you didn't do the firing, you don't have a whole lot of opportunity to know what exactly happened. If you did the firing, hopefully you take notes about the temperature climb, the temperature outside, if it's a windy, hot day, if it's cloudy, all those things matter. If it's electric, if it's gas, if the gas went out, or when you were doing reduction, the color of the flame. Hopefully you can tell that because the sun kind of camouflages it. All the details. Did you soak it? What temperature? How fast did it cool?
Myra, I think one of the things when we were talking about this, you shared with me is, if you refire, it's one, do you reglaze the piece? And two, do you have to take it up to the same temperature as you fired the kiln before?
For most glazes, especially glossy glazes, on the second firing, if it looks like there's enough glaze on the surface, you don't have to add glaze to it. And you don't want to take it to exactly the same high temperature. It will melt faster because it's already been basically melted. It will be more likely to melt sooner. So you could do probably a faster firing so it doesn't flow any more than you want it to, and take it to temperature and then cool it slowly. You'll have a good refire. Applying glaze to a piece that has been glaze fired can be done. If there's not too much glaze already on it, then you could add more. If there already is too much glaze on it, it's a toss-up whether or not refiring it will help. Obviously, with some of the pinholes, it does help. But if you have pinholes because of thickness, it's not going to help.
Let's go over here.
Part of this is like by feel, you know, you have to experience it. But just know if you fired it once and if it's a glossy glaze, it's going to flow sooner, more. So if it's really close to the foot, it could run off the bottom. The other thing about flow and glazes is if you have a glaze with barium, it will be very slow to melt. Barium tends to mat out glazes and cause very subtle crystallization within the glaze surface. And when it hits its max tolerance for temperature, it lets go and it flows off really fast. So it doesn't respond the same. A barium glaze will respond really differently when it hits temperature maturity. It cannot hold on. It just lets it all go. So that bottom roll on the glaze, that drip line, if it's a barium one and you go up 5-10 more degrees and it's still really hot in that kiln, it'll flow right off. It'll let go. And it's a sudden activity. People don't like using barium much anymore. It makes a soft surface glaze, and it's considered toxic because the surface is soft and porous and can become toxic. It can release into food and liquids. And it's usually the quick fix. The quick fix for that is to use strontium. Piece of it, and the rule of thumb is 1/2 the amount of barium that the recipe calls for. Use strontium for 1/2 that amount, and it will substitute for it fairly accurately. It may cause color changes because barium is a color modifier, so be prepared for that. All right, so what happens when? If you have a kiln, one more thing, if you have a kiln that is a disaster, you should really take your time reacting to it. Try to figure out why you think it's a disaster and note where the pieces are and whether or not they were affected by their location, whether or not the stack was a good one, whether or not the firing got out of control, if there was too much reduction or too much salt in a salt glaze or whatever, how the pieces respond to each other. Certain glazes will pick up colors from a glaze that's next to them, and they'll flash different colors than what you expected because of the glazes, the color components. The most obvious of that is chrome and tin. If you have a piece that's white next to a piece that has chrome, and the white is from tin rather than zircopax, and you have a piece that's like copper or chrome next to it in a kiln, and you reduce it, you're going to get blushes on the white surface from the pot that it's sitting next to. So there's interactions between the chemicals atmospherically as well. It's really good to be very curious rather than have too much expectation. You'll learn a whole lot more and you won't be so disappointed. And you might find that you'll find things that are much more exciting than what you had planned. Okay, so what happens?
So this question actually came up when we were in our gathering time of like, okay, so this isn't available any longer in the way aardvark's making their clay, and so they're trying something new.
Right, and people are having trouble because the clay is responding differently.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting. It is technically a crystalline clay material, but it's not just alumina and silica like most clays. It has magnesium in it, MgO. And because of that, it has a certain stickiness and a certain fluxing, modifying characteristic that really lends itself to glazes and to clay. And when I was young, I mixed up my own low fire clay by the bag, and it came in 100-pound bags. And I would have 2 bags of talc and 1 bag of clay and 1 bag of silica. And I put it in one of those dough mixers and mix it all together. And I'd have a white clay body that I used for all my sculptures. And you could throw with it. It was just terrific. And it would fire to cone, 04, 03 very safely. But it was in a small little closet room and no ventilation, and we never wore masks. We never even thought about it. And I'm thinking, all that talc, hundreds of pounds of talc in that air with this dough mixer going around and around. Yeah, those were the days. So my lungs are still okay. I don't tolerate raccoon smoke very well, but that's the only thing I can come up with that's bad.
So you had a long view of history of materials being available and then disappearing and something else coming in and filling in its place.
Things that we really cried about was when perotholite became really hard to find. It's a lithium feldspar, and it would make colors, blues, turquoises, and colors that were just breathtaking at cone 10. And it became really hard to find, if not at all. Albany slip became obsolete, although I see you can buy it. There's one supplier in Florida that was selling it for a while. And it, because it came from a certain location, between Canada and, say, New Jersey, there's a clay deposit that's very much the same in the strata. And there's Albany slip and Alberta slip, and maybe a couple others with names I don't know, that are from that same period in geological history. And they really do form glazes readily. They're dark brown and very finely textured and can be additives to clay and or glaze. But the Albany slip was the most dramatic of all of them. And all by itself, you didn't have to modify it at all. So it became unavailable, and a lot of us depended on it for a lot of things. And so then Laguna came out with an Albany slip simulation replacement material. And then there was Alberta slip that was also used as a substitute, but it never sang the same way that Albany slip did. It's different. And so it was really hard to make that adjustment. Then Colemanite became unavailable. And oh my God, the Colemanite glazes of yore were what everybody wanted. And so then we had to readjust to getting what Gursley Borate provided. And now they're threatening, I don't know about right now, but they said that Gursley Borate was going to go out and they were going to reopen the Colemanite mines, but I don't know that that ever happened.
So we as potters and ceramic artists have gone through this, oh no, this is not going to be available anymore. And we've moved on and found something new and have fond memories.
Yeah. And you have to feel like what you're making now with the materials that are available are temporary. They're from a period of time where they were available. Now, we had one material that was called zinc zirconium silicate that we used in a glaze that was just breathtaking. And we swore in our glaze class that we would find something that worked the same. And we went into the math. We had a couple people that were really into the math of it. And we made a substitute material that worked because we took it apart, the zinc, zirconium, and silicate, and we made our own frit. And we substituted it into the recipe and it worked. And now talc is a magnesium clay body. So my inclination would be to take a clay, kind of like maybe a graulig or maybe a ball clay, maybe Tennessee ball clay, because it has less iron. And I would add magnesium to it and see if that would help with the talc. And it's certainly in a clay body. If you add a little magnesium to your clay body, would that give you a clay that would be more like talc? My guess is that that's what Laguna did, but I haven't asked them. So you can break these materials down to their components and then try to simulate what they would do by adding the individual materials together. But because they're formed geologically over many, thousands or millions of years, those materials have transformed by by being cohesive and becoming one material. It's a compound material made by nature. And we can simulate it, but we can't reproduce it. It's like the only honey you can get is made by honey bees. You can get agave syrup and you can get this and that, but you don't get honey.
So
yeah.
I read some of the chat comments and people are delighted and excited and they say, can we do this again?
Really?
But I want to make sure everybody sees that Myra is part of the Ojai Studio Artist Tour and on Saturday, the 8th of October. So it's not all weekend. She's sharing her studio with the world one day. So if you're interested, you need to go to the ohaistudioartist.org website and you can sign up for an Eventbrite ticket. They're free.
Yeah, it doesn't cost you anything. And if you know where my studio is, you won't need the map. You can just come and please introduce yourself to me. My name with faces and proper names, my mind is a sieve. And I really would appreciate your help with me reminding me who you are.
The other thing is Myra's put together, it's a 1.5-page set of resources that lists books, digital and hard copy publications, some websites, and there's one more thing there, and I can't remember off the top of my head. It will go out as an attachment announcement in the next couple days, and we'll get Terry or Erica to post it on the Guild website inside the membership section. Right. So that resource will be available also. I'm going to call it a night, and I'm sorry that I brushed us through the last couple slides, but this, it's been meaty and dense and wonderfully full of all sorts of extraordinary information. And I want to thank you for taking the time to prepare for this and hang out with us and have those of us that have never met you before have a chance to meet you and experience your wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much, Myra.
Thank you, Foz. And again, if anybody wants to visit the studio another time, all they have to do is email me and we can make an appointment. And I would be glad to talk ceramics with them.
Okay, so there's more chats coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can we do this again? Thank you. Great meeting. So appreciate you and appreciate everybody that's hung out with us tonight.
You did a really great job helping us get this together. I appreciate you too.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Myra, this is Wynn. Thanks for your time and your energy and brilliance.
Well, I hope it was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to know what
you hold it all in a context that's easy to be with.
Yeah, it can be, and it can lead you anywhere you want to go.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll see you next month, and hopefully it'll be an annual meeting, right?
All right.
Right. Hopefully.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.